Good evening, dreamwalkers and midnight minds. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I hope the world has been kind to you today, wherever that might be. Maybe it's the quiet hours before dawn in Seoul, the golden dusk in California, or a rainy evening in Prague. I'd love to hear, what's your sky look like right now, and where are you listening from? If you're new here, welcome to DrowsyTeller, a place where whispered truths and forgotten stories rise from the shadows. Subscribe if you haven't already. There's so much more beneath the surface, and we're just getting started. Now, settle in, breathe deep, and listen closely, because after this story, even the softest thunder might sound like a warning. The following audio journals were recovered from a hard drive found in a long-abandoned storage unit in Spokane, Washington, in the year 2024. The listed renter, Juan L. Martinez, hadn't made payments in over 2 years. These recordings are presented just as they were found, with only light edits for clarity. The speaker identifies herself as Dr. Lena Murrow, formerly of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. What follows is her account of the Oakville incident, an event that began with a bizarre rain and ended with questions that still keep high-ranking officials up at night. The Oakville incident date, August 9, 1994. Time, 11:47 p.m. Location, Motel 6, Centralia, Washington. Static. Then the sound of a woman clearing her throat. This is Dr. Lena Murrow, CDC identification number 4471 Delta. I'm recording this on my personal device because I doubt the official channels will want to hear what I'm about to say. 2 days ago, I was in my Atlanta lab running routine tests on a particularly nasty E. coli strain from a food plant in Georgia. Standard Tuesday stuff. Then, around 3 in the afternoon, I got the call. Emergency deployment to rural Washington. Something about a biological anomaly affecting multiple civilians. They gave me the basics during the flight. On Sunday morning, August 7th, the small town of Oakville, population under 600, experienced what residents described as a gel rain. Not ordinary rain, not hail. Gelatinous, translucent blobs fell from the sky for nearly 6 hours straight. By Sunday evening, 23 people had been hospitalized with severe flu-like symptoms. By Monday, that number had risen to 41. I've been at this job for 8 years. I've dealt with anthrax scares that turned out to be flour, poison ivy mistaken for rashes, and even so-called zombie outbreaks that were just horrid cases of food poisoning. But this was different. I knew it the moment I landed in Seattle. Usually, small-town cases are solo assignments, just me and maybe a local official. This time, I had a full team. Dr. Marcus Webb from Virology, Dr. Sarah Chen from Environmental Health, and, here's where it got strange, a military liaison named Colonel Hayes. He refused to say which branch he represented. "Think of me as your government escort," he said when I asked. Real charming guy, the kind of charm that makes your skin crawl. We arrived in Oakville in a convoy of black SUVs. Subtle, right? During the drive, Hayes made several coded calls. "Package secure." Phase 3 confirmed. When I asked what Phase 3 meant, he smiled and replied, "Medical terminology, doctor. Above your clearance level." Above my clearance? I have Level 4 biosafety access. I've worked with hemorrhagic viruses that could wipe out half of Atlanta if mishandled. What exactly was above that? We reached Oakville around 4 in the afternoon. Picture a place lost in time. One main street, a handful of scattered homes and businesses. But what hit me hardest was the silence. No kids, no barking dogs. The people who were outside moved like they were wading through syrup. Sheriff Don Murphy met us at the makeshift town hall, a big man in his 60s with the weary face of someone who's seen it all. but his hands trembled as he handed me the report. "Never seen anything like it, Doc," he told me. "1 minute, it's a peaceful Sunday morning. Next thing you know, it's raining. I don't even know what to call it. Jelly? Slime? My wife got some on her hand checking the mail. Said it felt warm. Alive." He led us to their so-called containment area. Just a folding table with a few Tupperware containers. Amateurs, but I've seen worse. The samples were unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Translucent, jellyfish-like blobs with no visible structure. Some clear, others faintly yellow. No odor, which somehow felt worse. Dr. Webb poked one with a sterile probe. It jiggled like jello, then recoiled, as if it didn't want to be touched. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" he replied. But his eyes had seen it too. Hayes photographed everything with a device I didn't recognize, muttering data into his recorder. When I suggested sending samples to a proper lab, he said the Army had already arranged for field testing. "Field testing for what?" Dr. Chen asked. "Standard biological warfare protocol," Hayes said, like he was talking about the weather. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment the sample recoiled. These blobs shouldn't have reflexes. No nervous systems, no instinct. Unless they weren't just blobs. Pause. Papers rustle. I'm going to try and get some rest. Tomorrow we begin full analysis. But I already know we're not going to like what we find. Date, August 10th, 1994. Time, 6:23 a.m. Location, Oakville Community Center. Converted field lab. Sound of equipment humming. Distant voices. Good morning, if you can call it that. I didn't sleep, neither did the others. Dr. Webb had bags under his eyes deep enough to hold groceries. Dr. Chen kept fussing over her instruments like she expected betrayal. Hayes? He looked like he'd had 8 hours in a hotel buffet. Somehow, he had a complete mobile lab set up overnight. Electron microscopes, DNA sequencers, atmospheric testing rigs, gear that usually takes weeks to requisition. When I asked how, he just said, "The Army keeps emergency research assets in the Pacific Northwest." Emergency research assets for biological events in towns smaller than a high school class. Analysis began at 7. We started simple, microscopy. The gel contained human white blood cells. Not similar, actual human white blood cells complete with correct proteins and structure, but embedded in a matrix of something entirely alien. Dr. Chen's environmental scan came next. She detected aircraft fuel, specifically JP-8, used by military planes within the GL. Hayes immediately took interest. He suggested atmospheric contamination, but Chen had already ruled that out with controls. The presence of fuel indicated direct contact. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Dr. Webb, examining a sample under high magnification, noticed movement. Not random Brownian motion. Coordinated movement. Purposeful. "Lena, you need to see this," he said. On his monitor, I watched bacterial structures move, not chaotically, but in formations, as if following instructions. "Are those bacteria?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "They have bacterial traits, but the behavior is all wrong. Bacteria don't move like this, and look at this." He showed another sample. 2 bacterial strains, not competing for resources, but cooperating, working together. "It's like they were engineered," Webb whispered. That's when Hayes returned, and he wasn't smiling anymore. He demanded, didn't ask, to see everything. We showed him the white blood cells, the fuel, the cooperative behavior. He took notes in a black notebook he kept angled away from us. Then he closed it, looked at each of us, and said, What you've discovered is now classified under the Biological Weapons Convention of 1972. Everything you've seen, tested, recorded, now falls under the highest level of national security. Dr. Chen tried to object. We're CDC. We don't answer to the military. Hayes cut her off. As of this moment, you do. Your reporting obligations are now to me. He handed each of us a document, non-disclosure agreements written in language I'd never encountered before. The penalties for violation went beyond termination or criminal charges. They included something called administrative detention for national security purposes. I've signed NDAs before. Every CDC employee has. But this one felt different. It wasn't about safeguarding public health data or ensuring quarantine compliance. This was about concealing something. What exactly are we hiding? I asked. Hayes looked at me for a long, unreadable moment. Dr. Morrow, have you ever considered that not all biological incidents are accidents? Before I could respond, one of his assistants, when did assistants even arrive, leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Hayes nodded and turned back to us. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow. For tonight, I need all samples secured and the analysis equipment shut down. No further testing until I give the order. As we began packing up, I caught sight of Dr. Webb slipping one of the smaller sample containers into his bag. He met my eye and gave a subtle nod toward the back exit. Smart man. This whole operation reeked worse than week-old culture dishes. Sound of equipment being moved, voices growing faint. I'm heading back to the motel now. Tonight, Dr. Webb and I are going to run some unauthorized tests. If Colonel Hayes wants to classify our results, we need to understand what it is we're being told to hide. And I have a sinking feeling we won't like the answer. End of entry 2. The Oakville Incident. Continuation. Date, August 11th, 1994. Time, 2:14 a.m. Location, Motel 6, Room 127. Whispered voice. Typing heard in the background. Jesus Christ, I don't even know where to start. Webb and I spent the last few hours running analysis on the sample he smuggled out. We had to rely on his personal laptop and a small set of portable tools he brought for emergencies. But what we found changes everything we thought we knew about the Oakville incident. First, the bacterial strains. Using Webb's portable DNA sequencer, we isolated and identified them. One was a known strain, Bacillus cereus, common in soil and food products, but the other was something else. Not a variant, not a mutation, a sequence that doesn't appear in any genetic database. Here's the terrifying part. The unknown strain had clearly been genetically engineered. Specific gene sequences inserted with surgical accuracy, man-made, designed. And the target? Human neurochemistry. It's affecting neurotransmitter production, Webb explained, pointing at protein maps on his laptop. Specifically dopamine and serotonin pathways. This isn't designed to kill. It's designed to influence behavior. Behavior modification via biological agents. That's not medicine. That's weapons development. We were still wrapping our heads around the implications when there was a knock at the door. It was Dr. Chen. She looked rattled, ashen, eyes wide, voice trembling. They took Marcus, she said. What do you mean, took him? I asked. Dr. Peterson, the environmental specialist. He never showed up today. I went to check on him at his motel. His room was empty. There were signs of a struggle. And this was on the floor. She handed us a small device I didn't recognize. Webb did. That's military-grade data extraction tech, he said, face going pale. Used for mining data from computers and phones. Chen nodded. His laptop's gone, his phone, backup drives, but they missed this. It was hidden under the bed. She booted up her own laptop and plugged the device in. A few minutes later, after running a series of programs I didn't even understand, the screen lit up with a single document header, Classified, Project Rainveil, Phase 3. Operational Summary. Her hands were shaking as she read aloud. I'll try to summarize. Objective: field test of aerosolized behavior modification compound on controlled civilian population. Delivery method: KC-135 stratotanker using weather dispersal system. Target: Oakville, Washington. Population 598. Chosen for isolation and low media footprint. Compound: synthetic gel matrix containing engineered bacterial strains. B7, mood suppression, and B12, compliance enhancement. Suspended in a medium of human leukocytes for immune system camouflage. Expected effects: onset within 72 hours. Symptoms include low-grade fever, cognitive haze, reduced anxiety, and increased suggestibility. Monitoring protocol: embedded CDC team to observe and report under the guise of natural atmospheric investigation. Command authority: Colonel J. Hayes. It went on. Dosage schedules, control methods, even assessment metrics for behavioral compliance in affected populations. But the part that chilled me most? Phase 4. Authorization: upon successful completion of Phase 3, expand testing to rural areas in Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Future deployment in metropolitan zones, pending Senate Armed Services Committee approval. They weren't studying a natural event. This wasn't an accident. This was a test run. A biological field trial conducted on unsuspecting American citizens. How many people know about this? I asked. Just Peterson and me, Chen said. We had clearance for environmental data, but he knew something was wrong. He kept asking why military protocols were being used for an algae bloom, why we needed level 5 containment. That's why they took him, Webb murmured. We spent the next 2 hours backing up everything on multiple drives. The full scope of Project Rainveil was even worse than what that summary revealed. This wasn't some rogue initiative. It tied back to a classified research directive from the 1960s. Ongoing experiments in using engineered biological agents, not for elimination, but control. Population control. Not depopulation. Not extermination, compliance. Make people docile, more obedient, more receptive to media influence and state messaging. Oakville wasn't the beginning. It was just the next test site in a chain going back decades. Similar reports from towns in the Midwest and Southwest. All documented with the cold precision of a pharmaceutical study. Only they weren't testing medicine. They were testing mind control. Long pause, deep breaths audible. We've hidden copies of the files in 3 separate places. If something happens to us, someone will know. Tomorrow, we're expected to deliver our final report to Colonel Hayes. He expects us to conclude the incident was caused by unusual weather, atmospheric bacteria, and environmental coincidence. But I can't do that. I didn't become a doctor to cover up the use of behavioral weapons on American soil. Even if it costs me my career, I need to find a way to reveal the truth. The only question now's, how do you fight an enemy that can rain obedience from the sky? End of entry 3. Date, August 11th, 1994. Time, 6:45 p.m. Location, Oakville Community Center. Background, sounds of equipment being packed. Multiple voices. Today was supposed to be the final day of our analysis. Colonel Hayes called us in for an 8 a.m. meeting to review our findings. I walked into that room knowing this could be the last honest moment of my career. I wasn't prepared for what he said. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, standing before a projection screen displaying aerial photos of Oakville. "Your analysis has been invaluable to national security. However, due to the sensitive nature of your findings, we'll need to revise our public reporting approach." He clicked to the next slide. A polished draft report blaming the Oakville event on algae blooms, unusual weather, and bacterial contamination from agricultural runoff. "This," he said, "will be submitted to the CDC, state officials, and local authorities. It explains the symptoms and outlines recommendations for future prevention." Dr. Chen raised her hand. "Colonel, this report leaves out the white blood cells, the engineered bacteria, the jet fuel traces." Hayes smiled, but it was all teeth. "Dr. Chen, it's likely there was contamination in your lab procedures. Our independent tests showed no anomalies." He switched to another slide. Data charts identical to ours, but scrubbed of every irregularity. Standard bacterial signatures. Nothing suspicious. "I don't understand," Webb said. "We have the real data. You have evidence of testing errors caused by makeshift lab conditions." Hayes cut in. "Contamination happens. False positives happen." That was it. Not just a cover-up, a full rewrite of the truth. They weren't just hiding the use of biological weapons. They were gaslighting us into thinking we'd imagined it. "What about Dr. Peterson?" I asked. "Where is he?" Hayes casually flipped through his notebook. "Recalled to Atlanta for a family emergency. He sends his regards." His lies were smooth, practiced. For a brief moment, I even questioned my own memories. If I hadn't seen the Project Rainvale files with my own eyes, if I hadn't copied everything, I might have believed we'd just made mistakes in the lab. But I know what we found. And from the look on Chen's and Webb's faces, they know it too. Then Hayes continued. "I need each of you to sign this amended report, confirming the revised findings. Your signatures will indicate that you support the scientific accuracy of this document." Chen was the first to break. "I can't sign something I know isn't true." Hayes gave her a look that might have passed for sympathy. "Dr. Chen, I understand your concern for scientific integrity, but sometimes the greater good requires us to accept that our individual perspectives may be limited." The greater good? I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Colonel, we found evidence of biological weapons testing on American civilians. How is hiding that's serving the greater good?" The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Hayes shut his notebook and stared at me. "Dr. Morrow, I believe you may be suffering from the stress of extended fieldwork. It's not uncommon for researchers under pressure to develop paranoid interpretations of routine data." Paranoid interpretations. There it was. The classic discredit and dismiss strategy. Hayes kept going. "I'm willing to be understanding, considering the psychological strain of this assignment. If you sign the corrected report, we can arrange for you to take administrative leave. Time to recover from what's clearly been a traumatic experience." The threat was obvious. Sign the lie and disappear quietly, or be branded unstable and lose your career. Webb and Chen both signed. I watched them do it, hands shaking as they signed away their truth. I don't blame them. They have families, mortgages, careers to protect. The system is rigged to make resistance unaffordable for ordinary people. But I didn't sign. "I need more time to review the data," I told Hayes. He nodded, like he'd expected that. "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just remember, Doctor, sometimes the most patriotic thing a scientist can do is know when to stop asking questions." Sound of chairs scraping, people leaving. Everyone's gone now. I'm alone in the community center, supposedly packing up the last of our equipment. But really, I'm trying to figure out what to do next. I've spent my entire career believing that science serves the truth, and the truth serves the public good. But what happens when the truth is so dangerous that exposing it might be worse than concealing it? What if they're right? What if there really are national security threats that justify testing biological weapons on civilians? What if the greater good requires that some people suffer in ignorance so that others might be protected? Long pause. No, I can't accept that. The moment we start justifying human experimentation in the name of safety, we've already lost everything we claim to be protecting. I'm going to expose Project Rainveil. I don't know how yet, but the world will know what happened in Oakville, even if it destroys me. End of Entry 4. The Fallout. Begins. Date, August 13th, 1994. Time, 11:30 p.m. Location, undisclosed. Voice is subdued. Sound of traffic in the background. I can't say where I am right now. It isn't safe. Yesterday, after I refused to sign Hayes's falsified report, things moved fast. Too fast. When I returned to my motel, 2 men in suits were waiting for me in the parking lot. They claimed to be federal agents. I asked to see their badges. They just smiled and said, "Let's talk." The conversation took place in the back of a black sedan with tinted windows. They didn't threaten me, not directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they talked about other CDC scientists, people who'd developed psychological issues after high-stress field assignments, researchers who'd quietly been reassigned to desk jobs, placed on extended medical leave, or moved to positions where their paranoia wouldn't be a concern. "Dr. Morrow," one of them said, "we understand you've been under considerable strain. You've been working in difficult conditions, handling unusual samples, trying to protect public health. Anyone in your position might start seeing conspiracies where there are only coincidences." Then they offered me a choice. Accept a transfer to a low-profile role in the CDC's Historical Archives Division, or continue insisting on my misinterpretation of the Oakville data and face the consequences of being declared mentally unfit for fieldwork. I told them I needed time to think. That was my mistake. This morning, I received a call from my supervisor in Atlanta. Concerns had been raised about my mental stability during the Washington deployment. I was being placed on immediate administrative leave, pending psychological evaluation. When I tried to access my CDC email, my password had been changed. My government credit cards were canceled. My work phone was remotely wiped. Within 24 hours, they'd erased my entire identity from the agency I'd served for 8 years. But they made one mistake. They assumed I had kept all my evidence inside official systems. Before I left Oakville, I mailed copies of our real findings to 3 separate locations: a journalist I knew from graduate school, a professor at Johns Hopkins who specializes in bioweapons research, and a private storage unit I rent in Atlanta. I also uploaded encrypted versions to a secure bulletin board run by a friend for data sharing between researchers. If they want to silence me, they'll have to find every copy. Sound of papers rustling. I've spent the last 2 days conducting my own research, using public records and FOIA requests to trace the true history of Project Rainveil. What I've found is terrifying. The Oakville incident wasn't an isolated event. In the past 30 years, there have been at least 24 similar occurrences across the United States, each involving strange weather phenomena followed by unexplained illnesses, always in small, isolated towns, always under 1,000 residents, and always with little to no media coverage. 1967, Eureka, Utah. Reports of snow that wouldn't melt, followed by a severe flu outbreak. 1973, Millfield, Ohio. A chemical spill from a truck caused respiratory illness and fatigue. 1981. Hanksville, Utah. Weather research flights preceded a mysterious fever, locals called desert fog. 1988. Jordan Valley, Oregon. Algae bloom symptoms included memory loss and docility in half the population. Every incident followed the same pattern: unusual atmospheric conditions, illness, behavioral effects, nearby military aircraft activity. But what really scared me? I found proof that some of these tests were deemed successful and escalated. In 1976, San Francisco experienced what was publicly called a fog event. Thousands suffered respiratory problems. It was brushed off as a bad flu season. But what the public wasn't told? Military planes had been running weather manipulation tests over the Bay Area for months beforehand. They've been refining this program for decades. Oakville was simply the next stage: more advanced, more precise, more dangerous. Long pause, sound of a cigarette being lit. I tried calling the journalist I sent evidence to. Her editor said she'd been reassigned. Local politics. Not available for comment on conspiracy theories. The Johns Hopkins professor never returned my calls. His department finally said he was on sabbatical. In Europe. No forwarding info, someone got to them. Someone with the power to make people disappear with a phone call. But they haven't found all my evidence yet. And they haven't shut me up. I'm going to keep digging. I'll trace this to the top, find out who signed off on Project Rainveil. I have a horrible feeling Oakville was just a pilot program for something far larger. The question now isn't if they'll do it again. It's where, when, and how many lives will be affected next time. End of entry 5. The hunt date: August 20th, 1994. Time: 3:17 a.m. Location: unknown. Voice is tired, strained, sound of typing. It's been a week since my last recording, and everything's gone to hell. I thought I was being cautious. I thought I was one step ahead, but they've been watching me ever since I left Oakville, and they're very, very good at what they do. 3 days ago, I was staying at a tiny motel just outside Portland, using public terminals and burner phones to gather more intel. I was making progress. I'd started mapping what looked like the command structure of Project Rainveil, a joint task force involving the Army, Air Force, and something called the Biological Defense Research Command, which doesn't officially exist. I connected military installations, contractor labs, black budget projects, even found buried budget line items for atmospheric delivery systems hidden in Defense Department allocations. I was finally starting to understand the scale. That's when they found me. At around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone trying to pick the lock on my motel room door. I had been paranoid enough to wedge a chair under the door handle and set up a few makeshift early warning systems. Glasses balanced on the doorknob, that kind of thing. When I heard the glasses fall, I knew I had maybe 30 seconds before they got inside. I grabbed my laptop and the backup drives, shoved them into a bag, and climbed out the bathroom window. It was a 2-story drop, and I'm pretty sure I sprained my ankle when I hit the ground, but it was better than waiting to find out what they had planned for me. From the parking lot, I could see 3 men in my room, tearing everything apart. They were thorough, checking inside the toilet tank, ripping apart the mattress, even removing outlet covers to search for hidden storage. These weren't amateurs. These were trained professionals who had done this many times before. I limped to my rental car and drove until dawn, taking random turns, paying in cash, avoiding any digital trail. I was trying to stay ahead of whatever tracking systems they were using. But they found me anyway. Yesterday, I stopped at a small-town library, name withheld, to use a public computer and continue my research. About an hour into digging through military contractor databases, every terminal in the library suddenly lost its internet connection. The librarian claimed it was a service outage, but when I stepped outside, I saw a van parked across the street. Through the back windows, I could see high-end communications gear. They had jammed the network to stop me from accessing restricted data. That's when I realized the scale of what I was up against. This isn't just a cover-up of a single test. It's a coordinated operation spanning multiple agencies, military and intelligence. They have the ability to monitor internet activity, disrupt communications, and track individuals across several states in real time. But in their effort to stop me, they revealed their fear. If Project Rainveil were a minor research mishap, they wouldn't be deploying this level of force. The resources they're pouring into silencing one CDC scientist suggest the project is far more extensive and far more important than I initially believed. Sound of typing, papers rustling. Using cached pages and archived files I downloaded before they began interfering, I've managed to piece together more of the picture. Project Rainveil isn't just about testing biological agents. It's about deploying them. The symptoms we documented in Oakville, decreased anxiety, increased compliance, short-term memory loss, weren't unintended side effects of exposure. They were the goal. Think about it. What if you could make entire populations more obedient? What if you could suppress dissent, reduce civil unrest, lower crime rates, and boost social cohesion, all by adjusting neurochemical balance on a massive scale? That's what Project Rainveil is really about. Not killing people, controlling them, making them easier to manage, less inclined to question authority, more willing to accept official narratives without resistance. And based on the archived documents I found, they've been refining these techniques for over 30 years, quietly expanding their reach. Oakville wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype for nationwide deployment. Long pause. I found something else. References to what they're calling Phase 4 implementation. Budget projections for wide-scale atmospheric dispersal systems, purchase orders for chemical compounds measured in tons, not grams. This isn't about small towns anymore. They're preparing to release these agents over major metropolitan areas. According to the documents, Phase 4 is scheduled to begin sometime within the next 2 years. I have to stop this, but I'm running out of options, and they're getting closer. End of Entry 6. Escalation and Exposure Date. August 25, 1994. Time, 7:42 p.m. Location. Redacted. Voice more strained. Wind in background. This may be my final recording for a while. Possibly the last one I'll ever make. 5 days ago, I thought I had the break I needed. Using a combination of military contractor records and FAA flight logs, I identified the exact aircraft involved in the Oakville operation. A KC-135 Stratotanker, tail number 638877, operating out of McCord Air Force Base near Tacoma. More importantly, I found its flight manifest for August 6th, just 1 day before the incident. The aircraft conducted what was officially logged as a weather modification training exercise over southwestern Washington, with a flight path that passed directly over Oakville at approximately 3:47 a.m. The pilot was Major Dennis Kowalski, a Gulf War veteran with training in chemical and biological delivery systems. The mission commander? Colonel James Hayes. Yes, the same Colonel Hayes who oversaw our investigation. I had it. Clear, undeniable proof. The Oakville event was a military operation, a live deployment of biological agents against U.S. civilians, I contacted an investigative journalist at the Washington Post, thinking a major outlet could break the story wide open. I sent him encrypted versions of every file: the flight records, the Project Rainveil documents, the lab data. He called me within hours, clearly shaken but intrigued. We arranged to meet at a cafe in downtown Seattle to plan the release. He never showed up. The next day, when I called the Post, I was told he'd been reassigned, covering a Senate hearing on agricultural subsidies. Pressed for more details, they said he was unavailable for comment on ongoing investigations. That's when I knew they'd gotten to him. Whoever is behind this project has the reach to silence the Washington Post. I tried another route, contacted a congressional aide I went to college with. He worked for a senator known for challenging military overreach. At first, he was interested. Then, I sent him the files. Within 24 hours, he called me back with a familiar script. Maybe I was reading too much into the data. Perhaps the stress of fieldwork had clouded my thinking. It was the exact same phrasing Hayes and his agents used. Either they'd threatened him, paid him, or convinced him I was mentally compromised. It didn't matter how. The outcome was the same: typing, pages shifting. Then I found something that changed the game. A name I recognized from grad school: Dr. Elizabeth Carver. She had once worked at Fort Detrick in the Army's Biological Weapons Division. In the 1970s, she became a whistleblower, exposing human experimentation programs the military tried to bury. She went through the same thing I'm experiencing now: gaslighting, harassment, career sabotage, but she survived, and she kept fighting. I tracked her down through academic channels. She was working at a small liberal arts college in Vermont, low profile, still researching bioweapons. When I called, I barely had to explain. She already knew. "They've been expanding the program," she said. "What you saw in Oakville, that's just the most recent iteration. They've been at this for decades, and they're almost ready to go live." She agreed to meet, under strict conditions: no phones, no electronics, no credit cards, cash only, public locations, layers of backup communication plans. "They're good," she warned me, "but they're not perfect, and they're not invincible. There are ways to fight back." 3 days ago, we met in a quiet diner in rural Montana. Dr. Carver, in her 60s, with silver hair and a librarian's demeanor, carried the quiet gravity of someone who's been swimming against the current for 40 years. "The Oakville incident follows the same signature as dozens of others," she said. "They pick isolated towns, introduce engineered agents that affect mood, memory, and perception, then observe civilian behavior under the guise of investigating a natural anomaly." She spoke with certainty, not theory, knowledge, and it lined up with everything I had discovered. She confirmed what I feared. Oakville wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She showed me documents I had never seen before. Classified reports dating back to the 1960s, describing similar operations not just within the United States, but in allied countries that had granted permission for American forces to conduct defensive research on their soil. The ultimate objective, she said, was population-scale behavior modification. They wanted the ability to manipulate the psychological state of entire regions, making people more compliant, less likely to resist government control, and more vulnerable to propaganda and social engineering. The scope was staggering. This wasn't about occasional weapons tests. It was a systematic, long-term program to develop the capacity for mass psychological influence. "But why?" I asked. "What's the point of building a compliant population if you have to chemically manipulate them to get it?" Dr. Carver gave a grim smile. "Because the people running these programs don't believe democracy is sustainable. They see freedom as chaos. They think too much liberty leads to instability, rebellion, and collapse. In their view, a little chemical compliance is a small price to pay for order. She explained that Project Rainveil was only one piece of a broader initiative known as Cognitive Stability Operations, a strategy designed to give the government tools for managing what they referred to as democratic volatility. The idea was simple but chilling. By subtly altering the neurochemistry of targeted populations, civil unrest could be reduced, crime suppressed, and social harmony maintained. All without overt authoritarianism. They see it, she said, as a more humane alternative to military crackdowns or police state tactics. Instead of crushing dissent, they eliminate the impulse to dissent. Long pause. The wind grows louder. But Dr. Carver didn't just give me information. She gave me something more important, hope. There are others, she told me. Scientists, journalists, even government insiders, people who know what's happening and are quietly working to expose it. We had to be careful. We had to be smart. But we weren't alone. She connected me with a network of researchers and activists who'd been tracking government bioweapons programs for years. They had infrastructure, contacts, and, most critically, a strategy for getting the truth to the public in a way that couldn't be dismissed or erased. But for the plan to work, I had to vanish. No trace, no contact with my old life. Go underground and work with them to build an airtight case. One even the government's media machine couldn't spin away. The moment you resurface, Dr. Carver warned, they'll come for you. They'll destroy your credibility. They'll call you delusional, forge records, push stories about erratic behavior. They'll turn your friends and family against you. I nodded. I'm ready. At least I thought I was. Sound of car doors slamming, engine starting. They found me. Headlights are approaching from both directions on the highway. I don't know how they tracked me this time, but I'm out of time. If you're hearing this recording, it means I managed to upload it to the dead drop Dr. Carver prepared before they caught me. It means the network she told me about is real, and they're still out there. Most importantly, it means someone, somewhere, is still fighting. Project Rainveil is real. The biological tests on U.S. civilians are real. The plan to use behavior-modifying agents on major cities? Also real. And if we don't stop them, if we fail to expose what's coming, then, the next time it rains, you might want to ask yourself, is that really just water? Sound of tires on gravel. Voices shouting. Remember Oakville. Remember what they did to those people. And remember, the price of freedom. Recording cuts off. Source, anonymous upload, March 15th, 2024. Different voice. Male, younger. My name is Dr. James Mitchell. I'm a microbiologist with the Nebraska Department of Health. 3 weeks ago, the town of Hardington, Nebraska, experienced what local officials called an unusual weather event. On February 23, 2024, a gelatinous substance fell from the sky for nearly 6 hours. Within 48 hours, over 100 residents were hospitalized with flu-like symptoms, cognitive fog, and what physicians described as temporary personality changes. The CDC has labeled it a natural occurrence. Atmospheric algae bloom. The military denies conducting any aircraft operations in the area. But I ran my own analysis on the material. What I found matches exactly what Dr. Lena Morrow documented in her Oakville recordings 30 years ago. Human white blood cells embedded in an unknown substrate. Engineered bacterial strains targeting neurochemical pathways. Traces of military-grade jet fuel. Direct military involvement is undeniable. They're still doing it. They're still testing these agents on American civilians. Dr. Morrow's audio journals resurfaced last week, along with a cache of internal documents from Project Rainveil and its successor programs. The evidence is overwhelming. It's already being distributed to journalists, academics, and political officials worldwide. But that's not why I'm making this recording. I'm recording this because the Hardington incident wasn't a one-off. According to the leaked files, it was part of Phase 7 implementation, a coordinated, nationwide deployment of biological agents designed to increase social conformity and suppress unrest. The documents list specific targets, major metropolitan areas, timelines, delivery mechanisms. The full deployment is set to begin within the next 6 months. Dr. Morrow was right. Everything she risked her life to reveal, it's all happening. This is no longer a theoretical concern. The government has the tools for mass psychological influence, and they're ready to use them. Sound of typing. I'm uploading Dr. Morrow's full journal entries and the supporting Project Rainveil files to multiple secure servers across the globe. I'm also sending hard copies to verified contacts in the press, academia, and civil service. But I need everyone who hears this to understand. They won't stop just because we've exposed them. This plan has been in development for decades. The people behind it have power, money, and institutional protection beyond anything most of us can comprehend. The only way to stop them is together. If enough people hear the truth, if enough people refuse to accept the lies, if enough of us demand answers every time unusual weather is followed by mysterious illness, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop what's coming. So next time it rains, look up, look carefully, and ask yourself, what's really falling from the sky? Because Dr. Lena Morrow gave her life to warn us. The very least we can do is listen. The Bohemian Grove Operation Recovered Journal. Entry. Classification, redacted subject. Eli Granger, independent journalist. Date, range, July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location, Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. The following document was recovered from an encrypted server farm in Iceland. The journalist's current whereabouts are unknown. My name is Eli Granger, and I'm writing this because I may not survive long enough to say it aloud. What I witnessed beneath the redwoods of Northern California will haunt me for the rest of my life, however long that may be. It began 3 weeks ago with an email that should not have existed. I was in my cramped apartment in Oakland, sipping my third coffee and browsing encrypted whistleblower channels, when a message hit my secure inbox. No subject line, no name. Just a string of numbers and letters routed through 7 different proxy servers. There was a file attachment and 4 lines of text. You want truth. Go to the redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th to 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of what appeared to be a guest list for Bohemian Grove. Yes, that Bohemian Grove. The ultra-exclusive all-male retreat where the world's most powerful figures supposedly gather each summer to commune with nature, and, according to some, to plot world events. I had written about the Grove before, mostly relying on decades-old leaks and low-res photos. But this was something different. The names on that list chilled me. Former presidents, sitting senators, high-ranking officials from defense contractors I'd investigated, tech CEOs, big pharma executives, media tycoons with reach that spanned continents, all scheduled to attend an event called the Midsummer Encampment. And I had just received a direct invitation, whether I wanted one or not. At the bottom of the scan was a forged access pass featuring my photo, a professional headshot I'd never shared with anyone, digitally altered to show me in a black suit and tie. The name read Edmund Gray, logistics consultant, Prometheus Industries. Someone with serious resources wanted me inside that grove. The question was, why? I should have walked away, deleted the email, gone back to writing about municipal corruption and offshore tax shelters, safe stories, stories that don't get journalists killed. Instead, I packed a black suit and drove north into Sonoma County. The road to Monte Rio winds through some of California's most breathtaking terrain. Towering redwoods stretch across narrow two-lane highways, their canopies so dense that midday feels like twilight. It's the kind of place you'd expect to find yoga retreats and organic vineyards, not secretive gatherings where the fate of nations is quietly debated. But from my days in Navy intelligence, I knew one thing for certain. The most dangerous secrets are always hidden in the most innocent places. I checked into a motel in Guerneville and spent the evening walking the perimeter of Bohemian Grove. The compound spans 2,000 acres of private forest, encircled by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Security cameras every 50 feet. Motion sensors nestled in the trees. It looked more like a black site than a summer camp for billionaires. At the main gate, guards stood watch. Broad-shouldered men in black uniforms, wearing tactical gear, and the vacant, unreadable stare of those who've killed before and would do it again without hesitation. Whatever happened inside those woods, they were committed to keeping it buried. The pass worked flawlessly. Too flawlessly. The guards scanned the barcode, checked my face against the photo, and waved me through without hesitation. Either the forger was a genius, or someone very powerful wanted me there. Neither possibility was comforting. The grove looked exactly like the leaked reports described. Colossal redwoods, some over 1,000 years old, loomed over gravel paths that snaked between rustic cabins and open-air lodges. Each building bore a quaint name: Owl's Nest, Dragon's Den, Caveman's Lodge. It would have been charming, if not for the ever-present sense of dread that clung to everything like moss. The other guests drifted through the grove with the casual entitlement of men who never hear the word no. They wore the standard uniform of the American elite: polos, boat shoes, designer sunglasses, and expressions of absolute confidence. But the snippets of conversation I overheard said it all. The Shanghai index will drop exactly 17%. Tell the secretary Operation Nightfall is greenlit for October. Media blackout should hold for at least 72 hours. I posed as a logistics consultant, an excuse to move around with a clipboard. My phone had been confiscated at the gate and replaced with a company-issued device that couldn't connect to outside networks. The cover worked. Rich men are used to being surrounded by invisible staff who manage the trivial parts of their empires. But as the day wore on, I started noticing symbols. Owls, everywhere. Carved into tree trunks, etched into doors, molded into benches and lampposts. But not the friendly kind from children's books. These owls were stylized, severe, eyes wide and angular, always seeming to follow you. The largest one stood nearly 40 feet tall, a weathered stone statue on a man-made island in the center of a lake. Even in daylight, it radiated something ancient and malignant. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see an older man watching me. Silver hair, expensive leisure wear, that deep Floridian tan that only comes from winters in Palm Beach. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost translucent. "The Owl of Bohemia," he said, joining me at the water's edge. "It's been watching over this place for over a century. Some say it's just art. Others know better." "Know what, exactly?" I asked, immediately regretting it. I was supposed to be invisible. He smiled, showing teeth too perfect for a man his age. "You'll see tonight, Mr. Gray. The cremation of care waits for no man. Not even a consultant." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring at the giant owl, wondering just how compromised my cover had already become. That evening, as the sun vanished beneath the horizon, the mood shifted. The carefree veneer of the day was gone, replaced by something older, darker, and solemn. Men emerged from their cabins dressed in long, hooded robes. Some carried torches. Others held ceremonial items I couldn't identify. In my assigned cabin, I found a black robe and a note. Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all. What I witnessed that night will haunt me until the day I die. As darkness fell, hundreds of robed men marched through the forest. Torches swayed between the trees like sinister fireflies. The only sounds were footsteps on gravel and the occasional rustle of robes against bark. I joined them, hood up, head down. The robe reeked of incense and something else, something organic and rotting, difficult to place. We gathered at the amphitheater beside the lake. The owl statue loomed above us, its stony eyes lit red by the torchlight. At the shore, a wooden boat had been prepared. In it lay what looked like a child-sized effigy, small, wrapped in white cloth. Unmoving. Too realistic. At first, I told myself it had to be a prop. But the way the fabric clung to what lay beneath, the way it rested naturally in the boat, it felt real. Then a figure in ornate robes stepped onto a platform beside the owl. Even hidden beneath fabric, I recognized him. A former president. His voice carried, amplified by hidden speakers. "Brothers of the Grove," he intoned, "we gather again beneath the ancient eyes of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burden of conscience." The crowd responded, "We banish care and cast it to the flames. Care, that pale and common thing that binds the hands of power. Care, that voice of doubt that restrains the will to act." They chanted for nearly an hour. Ancient names were invoked. Moloch, the god of child sacrifice. Enlil, Mesopotamian lord of air and kingship. Names no American leader should be invoking. But it wasn't the paganism that disturbed me most. It was the ease, the comfort, with which titans of industry, men trusted to govern, embraced a ritual that celebrated the erasure of human empathy. At the climax, the effigy boat was pushed onto the lake. Flames erupted from hidden gas jets, surrounding it in fire. The white cloth ignited, falling away. I still don't know what I saw. The light flickered. Smoke obscured my vision. Maybe it was a mannequin, cleverly engineered to burn in a lifelike way. Maybe the cries I heard were just chemical reactions, but the way some men wept as it burned, the way others shouted with joy, it felt like something more. As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, I turned to leave, only for a hand to fall on my shoulder. "Mr. Gray." It was the same older man, now robed but unmistakable. "You're invited to the inner circle gathering, a rare honor for a consultant." Before I could protest, 2 other men appeared beside me, not threatening, but firm. Refusal wasn't an option. They led me away from the main path, deeper into the woods, to a clearing I hadn't seen before. Roughly 30 men stood in a perfect ring around a fire pit carved directly into stone. No stage, no theatrics, just ritual. Midnight struck. The inner circle removed their robes and replaced them with masks. White, polished bone shaped like owl faces, the eye holes empty and pitiless. They moved with precise, practiced motions. This was no theater. This was tradition. The man who had led the earlier rite stepped into the center of the circle. Without his statesman's poise, stripped of lights and titles, he was just another disciple, bowing before something far older than any modern nation. "Brothers of the Inner Grove," he began, "we gather to receive the wisdom of the ancient ones and to consecrate the plans that will shape the world's destiny." The response came in a language I didn't recognize at first. Harsh consonants and guttural vowels that seemed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to something primal and fearful in the human psyche. But then, my Navy intelligence training kicked in, and fragments started to register. It was Audian, the ancient tongue of Mesopotamia, dead for over 2,000 years. They were chanting the names of forgotten gods and vowing offerings, not of animals but of nations. Symbols were drawn in the ash around the fire pit, not crude occult doodles but precise sigils I recognized from declassified CIA materials. Project MK Ultra had experimented with ritual programming, using dead languages and symbolic structures to bypass conscious resistance in human subjects. The research had allegedly been shut down in the 1970s. Apparently, it had simply gone private. The ceremony continued for hours. Maps were unrolled, not of political boundaries but of economic zones, resource clusters, and population densities. The plans were spoken in a strange hybrid of English and Adian, but the intent was unmistakable. Wars to be triggered, governments to be dismantled, populations to be manipulated. And throughout, they never referred to themselves as American leaders. They spoke as servants of the Ancient Ones, preparing the world for some looming transformation. The harvest approaches, one masked figure intoned. The sleepers must be awakened. The old seals must be broken. The circle responded, "In the name of those who wait in the deep places, let the work continue." I crouched just beyond the firelight, recording everything with a digital audio device hidden in my shoe. But as the night dragged on, it hit me. This wasn't mere corruption. This wasn't even conspiracy in the conventional sense. These men truly believed they were serving inhuman masters. Whether those entities were real or imagined no longer mattered. The policies they were planning would affect millions, based on the supposed will of beings who saw humanity as little more than livestock. The ritual ended with each participant drinking from a silver chalice and offering private oaths. The liquid inside looked black in the torchlight. A few men convulsed after drinking, eyes rolling back, showing only the whites. As dawn approached, the inner circle dispersed. Masks came off, and every face was exactly who I feared. Former presidents, sitting senators, military brass, titans of commerce. They shook hands like businessmen concluding a deal. In a way, they were. I made it back to my cabin just as the morning sun began filtering through the canopy. But I knew I couldn't stay. The illusion of anonymity was wearing thin. Too many lingering stares, too many small smiles that said, "We know." They were letting me see just enough. A final warning, perhaps. But there was one last place I had to investigate. The Lodge of Styx. It sat apart from the rest of the compound, accessible only via a hidden service road not listed on any guest maps. I'd spotted it during my first sweep of the grounds, but hadn't had the opportunity to get close. From the outside, it appeared unremarkable, just another rustic lodge meant to blend into the woods. Inside, however, the security was anything but standard. Biometric scanners, electromagnetic locks, motion detectors capable of picking up a heartbeat from 50 feet away. Luckily, my unknown benefactor had given me more than a forged pass. Sewn into my suit's inner lining was a USB device, disguised as an ordinary flash drive but loaded with high-level infiltration software. Whoever designed it knew exactly what they were doing. I plugged it into a maintenance port near the entry console. Within seconds, the sensors were temporarily disabled, and the lock codes appeared on the device's tiny screen. Access granted. Whoever wanted me inside had prepared this with surgical precision. The lodge's main floor was a facade. Behind a false wall, hidden behind a sliding panel, was a staircase descending deep into the earth. The walls changed from wood to stone. This passage wasn't built with modern tools. It was ancient, carved into the bedrock, lit by electrical fixtures retrofitted into what once were torch sconces. At the bottom stood a thick oak door, heavy with iron rivets. Beyond it lay a chamber that defied logic. The room stretched far beyond the building's above-ground footprint. Stone shelves covered the walls, stacked with leather-bound journals, scrolls, and artifacts from across centuries and civilizations. In the center stood a massive black table, carved from a single slab of obsidian. Its surface was cluttered with documents, blueprints, maps, and folders bearing government seals. I moved to the shelves first, selecting a journal labeled 1923-1945. The handwriting was elegant, but the contents were horrifying. The European situation proceeds according to plan. Our associates in Berlin believe they serve the fatherland, but they serve the ancient ones. The sacrifice of the lesser peoples will empower the next phase of the work. Another journal, more recent, Operation Mockingbird, exceeds expectations. Media channels follow our cues without hesitation. They think they're defending democracy, but they deliver our narrative. The masses accept any reality we choose to feed them. But it was the documents on the table that unraveled my understanding of the modern world. Blueprints for the USA Patriot Act, dated 6 months before September 11th. Military strategy documents for Iraq, with fabricated WMD intel. Early drafts of social media algorithms, not built for connection, but for division, to fragment society into polarizable echo chambers. There were plans for pandemic responses prioritizing social control over public health, and blueprints for digital currencies designed to eliminate financial privacy entirely. One file detailed population reduction policies masked as environmental reforms. But the final document was what chilled me to the bone, a participant roster dating back to the 1870s when the Bohemian Club was founded. Names I recognized from textbooks: Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford. But then came names that didn't make sense. Men who by the laws of biology should not still be alive. Either the records were fabricated, or some of these participants weren't human. At the bottom of the most recent page, a note written in fresh ink. E. Granger, journalist. Witnessed Inner Circle Ceremony, July 16, 2023. Status: asset or liability. Recommendation: terminate if no compliance by dawn, July 18th. They had known exactly who I was. From the moment I arrived, the invitation, the forged pass, the flawless access. It had all been a test, and I was failing. A motion sensor pinged. Red lights flared along the walls. From above, the sound of boots on stone echoed downward. They were coming. I grabbed as many documents as I could, stuffed them into my jacket, and searched for an exit. But there was only one, the same stairwell now filling with hostile footsteps. The voices grew louder, clipped, professional, tactical jargon, military. Then the lights went out. Emergency red lighting flickered on a moment later, and in that brief, perfect darkness, I heard it. A voice, not through my ears, but inside my mind. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you've seen. But no, the telling will be your doom. And salvation requires far greater sacrifices than one man's life. When the light stabilized, a section of the wall had slid open, revealing a narrow stone tunnel. I didn't hesitate. Whatever had spoken to me, whether it was one of the ancient ones or something worse, it had just saved my life. The tunnels beneath Bohemian Grove stretched for miles, ancient passageways that linked natural caves with man-made catacombs. The walls were etched with sigils I'd seen before, but older, deeper, worn smooth by time and use. I followed the main corridor, guided only by faint, phosphorescent moss. The glow was just enough to avoid the worst of the hazards. Behind me, I heard pursuit. Voices, flashes of light, radio bursts. But the farther I went, the more distant they became. Either they couldn't find the entrance, or they didn't want to follow me into these depths. Eventually, the passage began to slope upward. The air grew fresher, filled with the scent of rain and moss. A natural exit, concealed by dense vines, led me out into the woods, several miles from the main compound. I emerged into a thunderstorm. The sky churned with clouds. Fat raindrops struck the leaves around me. Perfect cover. If I could reach my car before the search perimeter expanded. But as I moved through the trees, heart pounding, one thought began to rise in my mind. I wasn't alone. Figures moved between the trees. Not soldiers, not security personnel, something else. They wore the bone-white owl masks from the inner circle ritual, but something about their movements was wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate. More like dancers than men. And their eyes, faintly glowing with an eerie bioluminescence, weren't reflecting light. They were producing it. "The journalist has seen too much," one of them said. The words were perfectly clear, though the rising thunder should have drowned them out. "The ancient ones are displeased," said another. "But the pact must be honored. He was brought here for a reason. Let him carry the message. Let them know what awaits." I ran. Behind me, I heard laughter, not angry or mocking, but patient, predatory. The laughter of something that knew its prey had nowhere to run. I made it to my rental car just as the storm erupted. Rain hammered the windshield as I tore down the back roads, avoiding highways, burning through stop signs and red lights. In my jacket, the stolen documents radiated heat, or maybe that was just panic. But I'd escaped. I had proof. Tangible evidence of a conspiracy that shaped world events from a hidden grove in California. Or so I thought. I uploaded everything to a secure offshore server farm in Iceland. The photos, the audio recordings, the scans, my notes, multiple backups, anonymous networks, military-grade encryption. Within 6 hours, every single file had been wiped or corrupted. When I returned home, my apartment had been ransacked. Nothing obviously stolen, but every electronic device was gone. Laptop, phone, backup drives, even the digital camera I'd locked in a drawer. Erased. The mainstream press wouldn't touch the story. The alt-news blogs that initially expressed interest suddenly ghosted me. Forum posts about the Grove vanished within minutes. Reddit threads disappeared mid-comment. Search results rewrote themselves. It was as if the entire internet had been sterilized. But the worst part? The dreams. Every night I'm visited by visions, towering, tentacled beings that drift between dimensions, feeding on human pain, preparing to reshape reality into something unspeakable. Cities drowned beneath oceans of black slime, skies torn open with screaming winds, human beings, what remains of them, transformed into docile herds. They whispered to me, not that I'm a hero, not even a victim, a messenger. I wasn't meant to expose their secret. I was meant to deliver it, to spread the knowledge, to break humanity's spirit, not to warn, but to infect. Every word I type, every whisper I share, becomes another vector of despair. Hope corrodes. Institutions rot. Resistance withers before it begins. That's their real weapon, not death. Hopelessness. I'm writing this final entry from a motel room in Reno. I haven't stayed in one place more than a few hours in 3 days. But I know it doesn't matter. They aren't hunting me. They don't need to. I'm already doing their work, simply by remembering what I saw. The cremation of care wasn't just symbolic. It wasn't theater. It was a recruitment ceremony. And I wasn't an intruder. I was the initiate. Tonight, I'll drive east, toward the desert. Maybe I'll find some way to end this, to turn their tools against them. Or maybe I'll vanish, let the truth die with me. But if you're reading this, if these words somehow slipped through their filters, then remember, they say they're burning care. But what they're really burning is conscience. And every time those flames flicker, the world grows a little colder, a little darker, a little closer to being reclaimed by something ancient, something that's been waiting longer than we've existed. The fire in the grove never goes out. It spreads, invisible, inevitable, until everything human is ash. And in those ashes, something hungry is waiting to be born. Project Aegis. Hello again, fellow night travelers and digital truth seekers. Whether you're listening from a busy city street, a quiet suburb, or somewhere far off the grid, we're glad you've tuned into Sleep Theories, the place where the stories no one wants told finally find a voice. Tonight's story isn't fiction. It begins with a retired military satellite, KH-14B, officially decommissioned 3 years ago, its role absorbed by newer systems after budget cuts. But at 3:47 a.m., Novasyn's custom scanner picked up an encrypted signal routed directly through that dead transponder. "Lynx, you need to see this," she called across the converted warehouse that served as their base. The space looked like a digital morgue. Walls glowing with server light, red string connecting printouts of government contracts and biotech patents. Lynx Rodriguez rolled over in his chair, steam rising from his fourth coffee. At 32, he carried the kind of weight that came from knowing things. Former NSA turned whistleblower, now living in the shadows. "Military-grade encryption," he muttered, studying the waveform. "But using outdated protocols. Whoever sent this wanted it to look forgotten." Nova's fingers blurred across 3 keyboards. But the timestamp's fresh. From the corner, Jax glanced up, purple hair catching the glow. How fresh. 15 minutes. The room fell silent. Professor Kale appeared from the lab in the back. At 58, he was the oldest among them, a virologist disgraced for asking too many questions during the pandemic years. "Did you crack it?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Nova's screen filled with cascading code. Her decryption algorithms chewed through obfuscation like fire through paper. The file appeared. Project Aegis 2030. Lynx's voice dropped. That's bad. He remembered it. A theoretical black-budget proposal buried deep in Pentagon archives. Population dynamics, strategic resource modeling. "Let's see how theoretical it still is," Nova said, opening the document. Her face changed. Curiosity gave way to disbelief. Then horror. "Guys," she whispered, "this isn't surveillance, it's extinction." Jax spun in her chair. "Say that again." Nova highlighted the key variables: fertility suppression vectors, genomic sorting algorithms, population sealing mechanisms, mass vaccination campaigns, engineered disruptions to food chains, climate-targeted survival zones, target retention, 6 to 8% of current population. The silence was suffocating. 6 to 8%, Kale repeated. "Of over 7 billion people," Lynx said, mind racing. "That's not control," Jax said. "That's genocide, rendered in spreadsheets." Nova kept scrolling. "Listen to this," she read. "Traditional methods of managing growth, war, famine, disease are no longer sufficient. Project Aegis offers a unified species-wide reset. They're not talking about society, Jax said. "They're talking about us." "No," Nova corrected. "Not like people, more like weeds." Kale sat down, stunned. In his years of classified research, he'd seen plenty of red lines crossed. But this was the edge of human civilization. "We have to verify," he said. "Cross-reference programs, trace code fragments, build a timeline." "If it's real," Nova began. "It is real," Lynx said. "And it's already happening." He opened secure contacts, former colleagues, embedded allies. Jax dove into genetic databases, tracking crossovers between known research and the code they'd found. Nova began cloning the file, storing it on darknets, air-gapped servers, encrypted cold storage. "Professor," she said, "we'll need your expertise to analyze the biological payload." As the team dispersed to their stations, the room felt heavier. They hadn't just found a secret. They'd stumbled upon a blueprint for the end of human history. Outside, the city slept. Oblivious to what had just been uncovered, Nova stared at the file name blinking on her screen. Aegis 2030.c. In mythology, Aegis was the divine shield, protection of the gods. But protection for whom, and protection from what? A line from the file's executive summary echoed in her mind. "This isn't about control. It's about resetting the species." The countdown, she realized, had already begun. And it wasn't ticking toward a distant apocalypse. It was ticking toward tomorrow. But everything changes when you dig beneath the surface of the closed-door sessions. A classified document appears, heavily redacted, but with just enough exposed text to piece together a chilling story. The header reads, "Adaptive Earth Framework, Preliminary Implementation Strategies." Kale leans in, adjusting his glasses. "I remember that summit. I was a grad student back then, working on my dissertation in population genetics. There were rumors about private meetings, but no one ever spoke about what happened inside." "Someone did," Nova replies quietly. She highlights a section buried in the document. The room seems to grow colder as the text becomes clear. "Non-essential demographic drift must be addressed through coordinated intervention. Genetic dead zones offer an opportunity for selective resource allocation. Acceptable collateral impact established at 85 to 90% reduction over 2 generations. Integration of medical, agricultural, and environmental vectors is essential." Jax looks up from their terminal, a sudden intensity in their eyes. "Nova, you need to see this." They project a map onto the shared screen, cross-referencing pharmaceutical patents and vaccination data. Dozens of biotech filings between 2018 and 2023, all tied to a tangled web of shell companies, each linked to mRNA modification platforms. "But it's not just vaccines," Jax continues. "These aren't about disease prevention. They're dormant genetic editing tools, remotely activated, environmental triggers, airborne catalysts, stuff we don't even have public terminology for yet." Kale turns pale. "That's impossible. In 2018, we didn't have the tech for that kind of delayed activation." "We do now," Jax says grimly. "And according to these patents, it's already deployed." Nova pulls up another file from the Aegis cache. "Professor, remember you mentioned unusual test results in the pandemic trials?" Kale nods slowly. Some immune responses in control groups didn't match the expected profiles. Proteins with no therapeutic function, unexplained inconsistencies. When I questioned it, "They destroyed your career," Nova finishes, "labeled you a conspiracy theorist." "I was asking the wrong questions," he mutters. "I was looking for immediate reactions. But if the compounds were meant for delayed activation..." Lynx slides his chair over, placing a stack of printed intelligence documents on the table. I've been combing through NSA surveillance reports from the pandemic period. Rural areas, places that typically resist federal outreach, had unusually high vaccine participation. He spreads a map across the table. Bright clusters highlight isolated counties in Montana, farming towns in Iowa, scattered communities along the Appalachian spine. These aren't random, Nova says, connecting the data points. They're strategic, or genetic, Kale whispers. Jax's terminal pings with a new alert. Guys, there's chatter on the dark web, medical anomalies, forum threads, fringe case reports, private clinic logs. The display fills with disturbing trends. Unexplained fertility crashes in rural zones, autoimmune surges in adults aged 25 to 45, mysterious congenital defects and illnesses, unresponsive to any treatment. Nova begins mapping the anomalies to vaccine trial locations, birth rate charts, and demographic clusters. A pattern emerges, terrifyingly clear. It's not just disease suppression, she murmurs. It's genomic manipulation. They're rewriting what it means to be human, on a generational scale. Lynx pulls up another classified file, more recent. There's something else, he says. Homeland Security's been running something called genetic compatibility mapping. They've been collecting DNA through hospitals, clinics, school swabs, but they're not just cross-referencing it with health data. He pauses. With what? Nova asks. With survival probability models, he finishes. They're identifying who's genetically expendable. Silence descends. The weight of the revelation settles like ash across the room. This isn't just a conspiracy. This is the execution phase of an extinction algorithm, civilization's final exam, and most of humanity is about to fail. Kale rises slowly, his academic detachment slipping. They've weaponized the medical system, the agricultural system, the ecosystem. We've made ourselves the delivery mechanism. As if summoned by their discovery, Jax's monitoring array explodes with alerts. Encrypted satellite traffic spike. Same network as the original Aegis packet. Nova bolts to her station, initiating decryption protocols. A file begins to download. Each percent drips in like poison. It's not code, it's a video. Meeting minutes, Lynx says, from yesterday. Nova hovers over the play button. Once we see this, there's no turning back. She clicks. The screen fills with familiar faces, figures from news cycles and magazine covers. World leaders, biotech CEOs, tech moguls, top-level bureaucrats. They sit around a virtual conference table, casually discussing the logistics of ending the world. In one corner, a countdown timer. 18 months, 14 days, 7 hours, 23 minutes. The video is crystal clear. Studio-quality lighting, perfect audio, as if someone wanted it found by the right eyes. Nova adjusts the volume. A voice off camera. Audio check. We are now recording for archive. All participants biometrically verified. Proceed with briefing, responds a woman Nova recognizes, the director of the World Health Organization. Phase 3 implementation status, she asks. A silver-haired man appears in a new window. The tag reads, Dr. Harrison Vale, Protein Core Industries. Nova scribbles his name. She's never heard of the company, which means they've done their job. Phase 3 is on track, Dr. Vale begins. Biometric surveillance is now operational across 847 rural regions in 17 countries. Heat mapping, fertility analytics, and DNA profiling are fully functional. Genetic sequencing, Jax whispers. That requires physical samples unless they've already collected them, Kaylee finishes. Vale continues. Integration with consumer health devices has exceeded targets. Smartwatches, fitness apps, IoT monitors, they've covered 73% of target populations in developed regions. Nova stares at the Fitbit on her wrist, a Christmas gift from her sister. It logs her heartbeat, sleep, stress, and shares it with the cloud. Rural compliance remains challenging, Vale says. But our ag-tech partnerships offer workarounds. Routine veterinary procedures on livestock have yielded effective genomic mirrors for surrounding human populations. What does that even mean? Jax breathes. Cross-species contamination, Kale says. They're piggybacking human DNA into livestock, then tracking us through the food chain. Nova's eyes widen. Every burger, every glass of milk, every bite, carrying our genetic trace. A new speaker joins the meeting, Marcus Chen, Global Agricultural Systems. Nova flinches at the name. Agricultural vector deployment has surpassed expectations, he reports. mRNA modifiers are now integrated into livestock feed across North America and Europe. Human dietary exposure is currently at 94%. Any side effects? The WHO director asks. Minimal, as designed. Fertility rates in target zones are down 23% year over year. Autoimmune responses remain within forecasted tolerances. Nova's hands tremble. This isn't theoretical. These are progress reports on operations already in motion. Lynx leans forward. That voice. Wait. I know that voice. A new window opens. Central on the screen. The figure is obscured in deliberate shadow. Lighting engineered to prevent facial ID. But the voice is unmistakable. Calm. Controlled. Authoritative. Our strongest vector remains psychological, the shadowed speaker says. Saturation campaigns have normalized ideas like population decline, climate purification, and voluntary extinction. Despair is our most effective tool. Let the people surrender before they ever resist. The screen freezes. The recording ends. And the clock in the corner keeps ticking. Social media algorithms are actively amplifying despair, hopelessness, and anti-natalist ideology across targeted demographics. Mental fatigue campaigns? The WHO director asks. Exceeding projections, someone replies. Suicide rates in targeted age groups have increased by 34% year over year. Birth rates continue to decline as anticipated. Most importantly, resistance to authority has dropped significantly. Population compliance with forthcoming directives is expected to approach totality. Jax stands up abruptly, knocking over their chair. They're not just poisoning our bodies, they're poisoning our minds. Nova pauses the video, needing a moment to process what they're witnessing. This isn't just biological warfare, she whispers. It's psychological, sociological, environmental. They've weaponized everything we rely on to survive. Food, air, water, information, Lynx lists grimly. They're not attacking civilization, Kale says quietly. They've turned civilization into the weapon. He sinks into a chair, his scientific worldview fracturing and reforming in the face of undeniable evidence. The fertility collapse, the autoimmune disorders, the epidemic of psychological depression. It's all part of the same strategy. It's all intentional. Nova restarts the video. The shadowed figure continues. Phase 4. Preparations are nearly complete. Environmental catalysts are in position. Once activated, they will trigger the latent biological modifications embedded in the target population. Estimated full activation timeline, 18 months. The WHO director nods in approval. Excellent. Resistance potential? Minimal, replies another. Independent researchers who approached dangerous discoveries have been discredited, defunded, or quietly removed from academic and professional institutions. Media coverage of related topics has been redirected to established conspiracy theory tropes, ensuring public dismissal of accurate information as delusional paranoia. Nova stares at the screen, heart pounding. How many others found pieces of this? How many were erased before they could speak? Dr. Vale, the shadowed figure continues. Status update on asset protection? Dr. Vale reappears on screen. All protection protocols are active. Essential personnel and their families have received modified treatments. Genetic compatibility with the post-implementation biosphere is confirmed. Estimated survival pool, approximately 500,000 globally. 500,000? Jax echoes, numb. Out of 7 billion? The video begins to degrade. The satellite signal is weakening. But one final exchange comes through, crystal clear. Any concerns about discovery? Someone asks. Unlikely, a voice replies. The operation spans medical, agricultural, environmental, technological, and psychological systems. No single research group or intelligence agency has access to all data vectors. Except, the WHO director adds wryly, if a team existed that combined expertise in cryptography, virology, intelligence gathering, information theory, and social engineering. A low laugh from the shadowed figure. The probability of such a team existing, with access to the right data and the will to act, is statistically 0. The screen goes black. Silence envelops the warehouse. Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kale exchange glances. A single unspoken truth hovers in the air. Well, Nova says, I guess we're statistically 0. None of them notice the tiny LED blinking on Jax's communications rig, the one indicating unauthorized network monitoring. Their 0 probability team just became a confirmed threat. And somewhere, Phase 4 has just been accelerated. At exactly 4:17 a.m., 3 hours after they finished reviewing the intercepted meeting, the warehouse's security system erupts in sirens. Nova jolts awake at her desk, surrounded by documents and screens. Warning lights flash red across every terminal. Intrusion detection systems are triggering across the board. Lynx, she yells, heart racing. We've got company. Lynx rolls from his sleeping bag, grabbing his go bag and laptop. What kind of company? The kind that uses military-grade cyber tools. Nova snaps, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Someone's been inside our systems. They've seen everything. Jax stumbles in from the back room, purple hair tousled but eyes alert. How long have they been watching us? Unknown, Nova says. But they have root access. They're not just spying. They're erasing. Our files are vanishing. Kale appears, clutching a hard drive. I backed up all the biological data to an air-gapped system. If we lose the main servers, we are losing them, Nova confirms. They're scrubbing everything. But even as the digital walls collapse, Nova's mind moves faster. Jax, initiate the mesh network. Lynx, get the satellite uplink. We're going distributed. The warehouse shifts. What once looked like a hacker den transforms into a high-functioning intelligence bunker. Jax's workstation unfolds into a full-spectrum comms hub. Lynx pulls encrypted gear from a hidden compartment. Nova's desk conceals secondary servers and backup batteries. Professor, Nova calls, how much of your data is stored offline? All of it, Kale replies. I stopped trusting cloud servers after they burned my career. As their digital infrastructure dissolves, The team executes an emergency protocol they had hoped to never use. Critical files are sent to redundant safe houses. Communications reroute to dark web nodes. Physical evidence is packed in go bags, but Nova's not running. Not yet. Instead, she's tracing the breach. "What are you doing?" Lynx demands. "If they're watching us," she growls, "then we're watching them." Her screen bursts with data streams, packet traces, DNS routing chains, proxy networks. The attack is elite, multiple layers of obfuscation, but high complexity leaves fingerprints. "There," she whispers. "They're not just stealing our data, they're planting something." The upload completes. Nova opens the file, face twisting in horror. "Child pornography," Lynx says, voice hard. "They're framing us." Nova nods. "Brilliant. Discredit us entirely. Bury the truth under revulsion." But her trace reveals something else. A location. "They're not foreign operatives," she says. "They're operating from the Protein Core building, Vale's company. The same people who discussed wiping out humanity 3 hours ago," Jax adds. "We need to leave," Lynx urges. But Nova's still at her console, her eyes locked on a new stream of intercepted audio. "Wait, they're having an emergency meeting, right now, about us." She patches it through the speaker. Dr. Vale's voice. "Confirmed. They possess Phase 3 documentation. Full implementation specs." "Impossible," says the WHO director. "That material is compartmentalized under 17 separate classification tiers." "Unknown how they acquired it," Vale replies, "but their operational capabilities imply access to state-level intelligence assets." The shadowed figure cuts in, voice sharper now. "Irrelevant. If they go public, the entire operation collapses. Immediate containment required." "What kind of containment?" Vale asks. "Total, the team, their facility, burn it. Gas leak, chemical fire, whatever destroys every trace." Nova's blood runs cold. "How much time?" asks the WHO director. "Tactical team en route. 20 minutes. Nova shuts down systems. "We're blown. They're sending a kill squad." 20 minutes? Jax checks their watch. "That's not enough." "It's enough for one thing," Nova interrupts, launching her final protocol. "We can't save ourselves, but we can save the data." She starts uploading everything to a decentralized blockchain archive. Tamper-proof, unstoppable, out of their enemy's reach. But it's massive. The connection is weak. "Upload time, 17 minutes, the system reports. 3 minutes to spare, Lynx mutters, checking his rifle. But new alarms scream. Motion sensors trip. Thermal pings outside. Multiple vehicles. "They lied," Nova breathes. "They're already here." Black SUVs swarm the perimeter. Tactical lights sweep through broken windows. Radio chatter echoes from the darkness. "Upload at 32%, the terminal reports. Nova looks at the others, her friends, her resistance family. Jax, the optimist. Lynx, the protector. Kale, the truth seeker. "I need 8 minutes, she whispers. "Can you give me that?" Lynx shoulders his weapon, the same model he carried on government missions. He scans their sanctuary, their battlefield, their final stand. "Yeah," he says. "We'll give you 8. We can give you 8 minutes." As the first breaching charges detonated against the warehouse doors, Nova's fingers danced across the keyboard, uploading humanity's final testimony into the digital wind. Outside, boots thundered against concrete. Orders were shouted in clipped tactical shorthand. Inside, 4 individuals who had uncovered the truth behind humanity's end fought to ensure someone, anyone, would learn what really happened. The upload bar crawled forward. 47%, 48%, 51%. In the distance, sirens wailed. Whether they signaled help or cleanup, no one could say. Upload progress, 73%. Nova's hands moved with mechanical precision, even as automatic weapons fire ripped through the warehouse's steel-plated walls. Lynx and Jax had constructed a makeshift defensive position behind stacked server racks, returning fire with the modest arsenal Lynx had maintained precisely for this scenario. Kale crouched beside Nova, clutching backup drives like sacred relics. "How much longer?" Lynx shouted over the gunfire, ejecting an empty magazine. 3 minutes, Nova called back, sweat dripping onto the keys as she fought to keep the connection alive through power fluctuations. A tactical officer appeared at a shattered window. Jax dropped him with a single, precise shot, the kind their grandfather had once taught them while plinking soda cans off fence posts in rural Oregon. He never imagined that lesson would one day defend the future of the species. Upload progress, 81%. "Nova!" Kale shouted, pointing at the main screen. "They're jamming our satellite." Nova looked up. Their upload speed was plummeting. The decentralized storage was failing as electromagnetic pulses hammered their systems. Years of planning, layers of redundancy, multiple backups, all being unraveled by an enemy who understood them far too well. "Switch to hardline," she barked, yanking cables from concealed floor ports. "If the satellites are down, we go terrestrial." But even as she rerouted the connection through buried fiber optic lines, the screens told the truth. These weren't just soldiers, they were technicians, experts in signal warfare. This wasn't an assault. It was a digital sterilization. Upload progress, 89%. "They're inside the network," Nova muttered, watching as files corrupted mid-transfer. "They're not jamming the signal. They're poisoning it." Malicious code poured in through every line, infecting not just local systems but the destination servers themselves. No matter where they uploaded the evidence, the same viruses followed, wiping it clean before it could propagate. 90 seconds, Lynx shouted, reloading. Nova's mind scanned for alternatives. Local drives compromised, cloud infected, peer-to-peer, monitored. Then she remembered. One network their enemies likely hadn't anticipated. "Jax!" she yelled. "Emergency radio protocol. Can you reach the ham networks?" Jax nodded instantly. Analog communication. Shortwave radio, predating the internet by decades. It might be their last unguarded path. As Jax assembled gear, Nova began compressing their data into audio-transmittable packets. Project Aegis, population control, biological re-engineering, all encoded for transmission through shortwave frequencies. Upload progress, 94%. Transmission corrupted. Their internet connection blinked out entirely as another EMP struck, frying what was left of their digital infrastructure. Then, Jax's radio crackled to life. Somewhere, the old network still breathed. "This is Emergency Station Alpha, calling CQ, emergency traffic," Jax announced. "We have critical data for immediate relay. Repeat, critical data for immediate relay. Static." Then replies. Dozens of voices answered, retired engineers, disaster volunteers, hobbyists. The last free channel on Earth. Nova started the transmission. Fragments went out to different operators with instructions for reconstruction and distribution. It was slow, inefficient, messy, but it was working. Until the lights failed. Emergency lighting flooded the space in blood red. Outside, they could see power lines being severed, methodically, surgically. The building was being cut off from the grid. They're isolating everything, Kale murmured. Power, internet, spectrum, total blackout. Nova's laptop battery gave her 10 minutes, maybe less. She kept transmitting. Data fragments, tiny digital seeds scattered to the wind. Nova, Lynx shouted. Movement on the roof. They're coming through the skylights. She looked up. Tactical teams were rappelling through the ceiling. Night vision, thermal optics, precision. In 30 seconds, they would control the room. In 30 seconds, Project Aegis would vanish from human memory. But Nova had one last move. A gamble that broke every rule she'd ever followed. She grabbed her personal phone. Going live, she whispered, opening a social media app and starting a live stream. My name is Nova Chen, she said, staring directly into the camera as gunfire erupted behind her. If you're watching this, you need to know the truth. Governments and corporations are planning to kill most of the human race. Viewer count. Climbing. Hundreds. Thousands. Tens of thousands. They call it Project Aegis, she continued, unwavering. It's population reduction. They've modified vaccines, contaminated the food supply, weaponized the climate and your devices. Tactical operatives breached their defenses. Lynx was hit. Blood spilling across the floor. Jax kept broadcasting, even as red laser dots danced across their chest. 18 months, Nova said. That's the timeline. If you've been vaccinated, if you eat processed food, if you wear a fitness tracker, you're already part of the system. A rifle butt struck her face. The phone spun across the floor. The live stream continued, now showing boots, shadows, spreading blood. But it was enough. In just over 3 minutes, more than 50,000 people saw Nova Chen's final message. And in a hyper-connected world, 50,000 becomes 5 million overnight. The last image her phone captured was a gloved hand lifting it. A voice, off-screen, calm and final. Sanitize everything. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace this place ever existed. Then static, then silence, then nothing. 6 months later, the official report from the Woodland Fire Department described it as a tragic industrial accident. Improper chemical storage in a condemned warehouse. 4 dead. Total loss. Local news ran it for 1 day. The live stream that briefly circulated online was flagged for graphic content and misinformation. Deleted, blocked, accounts suspended. But the internet never forgets what it's forbidden to remember. On encrypted forums and dark web threads, fragments of Nova's broadcast still circulate. Screenshots, audio clips, transcripts, shared by digital monks and conspiracy archivists who know something real happened. Truth Seeker 2000. Anyone remember that girl from the warehouse? Nova Chen? Project Aegis? Video's gone, but I swear I saved it. Digital Ghost. Same. File corrupted when I tried to open it. Everything vanished. Red Pill Reality. Still remember what she said. Biological modifications, population collapse, food contamination. 18 months. We're down to 12. Meanwhile, ham radio operators trade pieces of the data. Academic researchers compare unexplained anomalies in vaccines, agriculture, environment. Quiet whispers emerge. Dr. Sarah Martinez at UC Davis publishes data on declining rural fertility. Professor David Kim at MIT finds non-therapeutic proteins in vaccine batches. His funding disappears within 3 weeks. Journalist Lisa Chen investigates biometric gear in remote regions. Her article gets pulled. Every censored study, every deleted post, every buried broadcast becomes another signal in the noise. A signal that says, Nova was right. The truth spreads like a virus through the digital underground. 12 months later, Maya Patel is 17 years old and has never heard of Nova Chen, Lynx Rodriguez, Jax Morrison, or Professor Kale. She lives in a small village in rural India, where internet access is limited and social media is a luxury reserved for urban elites. But Maya is curious, sharp, and determined. She has access to her school's computer lab 3 days a week, where she spends her time learning about environmental science, genetic engineering, and the intersection of biology and technology. Her dream is to study at a university abroad and help solve the world's agricultural challenges. During one of her lab sessions, she finds a flash drive buried in a box of discarded electronics donated to the school. It's wrapped in plastic and electrical tape, as though someone had tried very hard to preserve it. The faded ink label reads, Population 0, Proof Vault. Maya plugs it into the computer, expecting to find old homework or family photos. Instead, she discovers 847 gigabytes of encrypted files, research documents, intercepted communications, and video logs. She finds genetic modification protocols, pharmaceutical patents, agricultural contamination strategies, and psychological warfare models. She finds the complete archive of everything Nova Chen's team uncovered about Project Aegis. The encryption is military grade, but Maya is patient. She spends 3 weeks cracking the codes, working through lunch breaks and staying after school until the janitor turns off the lights. Once inside, she spends another week trying to understand what she's found. Population reduction through coordinated biological intervention. Genetic modification systems triggered by environmental factors. Food chain contamination engineered to induce sterility and immune failure. Psychological warfare campaigns designed to normalize extinction and suppress resistance to authority. A timeline that originally targeted the year 2030, but has since accelerated to 2027. Maya realizes she's looking at a blueprint for planned global extinction, and the most recent files suggest the final phase is scheduled to begin in 6 months. She copies the archive to multiple storage devices and begins verifying it, cross-referencing every claim with publicly available data. Patent filings, agricultural records, vaccine compositions, environmental monitoring trends. Everything Nova's team reported checks out. Every shred of evidence is valid, and almost no one knows. But Maya Patel is 17, raised in a culture that honors education and truth above fear. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't second-guess. She doesn't think about staying silent. She uploads the entire archive to every platform she can access. WikiLeaks, anonymous Dropboxes, academic repositories, social media networks, government watchdog sites. She submits it to journalist tip lines, activist groups, research forums, and whistleblower channels. She translates the most critical files into 17 languages and disseminates them across international networks. She creates simplified versions for public consumption and technical breakdowns for experts. She floods the internet with the truth. And this time, it's too late to stop the signal. Within hours, Maya's uploads are being downloaded thousands of times. Within days, those downloads turn to millions. Major media outlets pick up the story. World governments demand investigations. Health organizations call emergency sessions. The carefully orchestrated global depopulation plan, executed through vaccines, food systems, and digital surveillance, becomes the most thoroughly documented conspiracy in history. Dr. Harrison Vale tries to discredit the data as an elaborate hoax. The WHO director claims the communications were taken out of context. Government officials deny all knowledge, but the archive is too comprehensive. The independent verification too vast. Too many researchers in too many nations, working with too many separate methodologies, all reach the same conclusion. Project Aegis is real. It's active, and it's working. Global fertility rates have dropped 34% in just 3 years. Autoimmune disorders have surged 78% among populations that received modified vaccine batches. Agricultural workers in engineered crop zones exhibit genetic markers consistent with targeted exposure. Psychological depression and suicide rates have spiked in exactly the age brackets targeted by social programming initiatives. This is not a future threat. This is a mass extinction event in progress. 18 months after the warehouse assault, Maya Patel stands before the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Behind her, screens display population curves, fertility statistics, mortality data, and genetic manipulation records. She holds up the same flash drive she found in a plastic-wrapped bundle in her school's electronics box. This device, she tells the court, contains the full archive of Project Aegis. It was compiled by 4 researchers who died trying to expose what was being done to us. She places the drive on the witness stand. Nova Chen was 26 when she was murdered for uncovering that our governments and corporations had poisoned humanity. Lynx Rodriguez was 32 when he died defending her right to speak. Jax Morrison was 21 when they gave their life to transmit this data to the world. Professor Kyle was 58 when he was silenced for asking the wrong questions. She looks directly at the defendants, pharmaceutical executives, defense officials, corporate elites, sitting behind bulletproof glass. They died so we could live. They died so humanity would know the truth. They died so that the people responsible for the greatest genocide in history could be held accountable. She lifts the flash drive once more. Their names were Nova, Lynx, Jax, and Kyle. They saved us, and they deserve to be remembered for it. The courtroom falls into silence. Victims' families weep. Journalists race to file stories that will be read by billions. And in a small village in India, Maya's former computer science teacher watches the live stream and smiles quietly. Sometimes the truth survives. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes 4 people in a forgotten warehouse save the world, long after they're gone. Epilogue. The network remembers. 5 years later. The Maya Patel Institute for Digital Truth and Transparency now occupies a gleaming tower in New Geneva, funded by reparations from the corporations responsible for Project Aegis. Carved in stone above the entrance, the network remembers everything, especially the things someone desperately wanted forgotten. In the lobby, 4 portraits hang side by side. Nova Chen, cryptographer and digital warrior. Lynx Rodriguez, intelligence analyst and protector. Jax Morrison, social engineer and prodigy. Professor Kyle, biologist and truth seeker. Beneath their faces, a simple inscription. They found the code that wasn't meant to be found. Tourists pass by the portraits. Students study beneath them. Many never learn the full story. But the staff knows. The researchers and digital activists working within those walls understand the legacy they carry. And late at night, when the Institute sleeps and only the servers hum, network monitors sometimes register anomalies, ghost signals, fragments of data, rerouted packets through untraceable paths. Some say it's just static, glitches, digital echoes, but others believe it's more than that. The voices of 4 warriors, still broadcasting, still uploading, still fighting to keep the truth alive. In the spaces between the data, the network remembers.